Earlier today, CD Projekt had their earnings call for their Q1 2021 earnings. This being heavily focused on Cyberpunk 2077, but one of the big impacts of this call was it kind of confirmed what a lot of people were suspecting, and that was, despite Cyberpunk 2077 having a very successful initial launch, selling nearly 14 million copies in 2020, things are going to fall off pretty quickly following all of that bad press and news, and we really are just getting confirmation of that now. We see CDPR stock falling nearly 6%, this after many months of already declines, and in this video I want to break down some of these new numbers, why things are looking so bad currently for CDPR, but also why things may be looking up in the future and why you should be excited perhaps for the next couple of weeks. So as I mentioned, the writing was on the wall for CDPR to have a rough couple of months with Cyberpunk 2077 following that initial bump and all the hype that came before release, leading it to sell so many copies. One of the big and notable things being that removal from the PlayStation Store. And over the past couple of months, there's been a lot of predictions or analyzing on this. How many copies would CDPR sell of Cyberpunk, with one analytics firm actually saying it could have as much as a 99% decline in sales. This being a massive drop even compared to most other AAA games, and well, really with the earnings call, we got almost a confirmation of that. Now, though CDPR did not give out direct numbers on how many copies were sold of Cyberpunk 2077, what they did give out, of course, was their revenue figures. And when you have revenue figures, as well as how much money they get per copy sold, you can potentially reverse engineer that to get a rough idea of copies sold. And during the earnings call earlier today, one of the analysts did this calculation, asked that exact question, estimating it to be only around 800,000 or so. CDPR did respond saying that there are a lot of reasons why this calculation could be inaccurate, but based off the numbers overall, it definitely seems like Cyberpunk may have sold under 1 million copies in all of Q1 2021. So while in just December of 2020 it sold almost 14 million, in January, February, and March of 2021 it may have sold under 1 million. That's a huge drop off, and actually a lot worse than even what some analysts were predicting. We saw the stock drop almost 6% today, and that's a big deal when you look at the stock over the past few months. It's already dropped a ton. CDPR is worth less than half of what it was 6 months ago, and although this number is definitely overinflated, that's still pretty bad. And just a couple examples of some of these numbers as to how bad things were here. Analysts expected CDPR to have profits in the 80 million range, while in reality it was only 32.5 million. And even if you look at their revenue from products sold in Q1 of 2021 versus 2020, their 2021 revenue was only 5,000 more. So to put that into context, the 3 months after their release, their most highly anticipated game of all time only made $5,000 more in revenue compared to the same 3 months a year ago when there was nothing going on outside of people like The Witcher and the pandemic ensuing. And to be clear here, these are not United States dollars, these numbers are all in PLN, which is the Polish currency. So it being such a small improvement is really big and notable news. And if you look at the game overall, there just aren't a lot of people playing it right now. In the past week, it fell off the top 50 games being played on Xbox. This likely in part due to it being a shorter single-player RPG, but of course the bugs probably played a big role also, but it is under Brawlhalla now as far as player base on Xbox, and even on Steam, it did lose 20% of its player base in the past 30 days. This of course doesn't account for GOG, which is likely one of the most popular platforms on PC for this game, or at least pretty close to Steam compared to most other games, but still, that's a big drop. One of the big reasons sales were so low, and in turn profits, revenues, etc. were so low for Cyberpunk was of course the removal from the PlayStation Store, not really having a direct outlet to sell the game on PlayStation overall. And there are quite a few questions and responses about this by CDPR. They mention how, on a high level, there is a metric Sony is looking for CDPR to hit with Cyberpunk to relist it on the PlayStation Store. They won't specify what that metric is, and they very clearly describe this as on a high level, so it could be just several factors they're looking at, and basically it seems like PlayStation's like, alright, once you do this or get closer to this, we will relist the game. And based on the earnings call overall, it didn't really give the impression that this was imminent or about to happen. Perhaps not directly related to that metric they mentioned with Sony, but one of the things they actually showed off very early on in their presentation was this graph of the crash rate. It's basically supposed to showcase, and I guess does technically showcase, a decrease in the overall crash rate of the game with each update, so it's now lower. And if this graph didn't immediately throw up a ton of red flags for you, well, hopefully now from this video you'll know why graphs like this are horrible, and that is it is completely missing a y-axis, so you don't really know what this means. Technically, all this graph means is is the crash rate went down, but you don't even know what the starting point is and what the ending point is. Like, technically speaking, this could be 54% to 55%, so it's only a 1% drop. Now, I don't think that it's probably much more than that, probably in the tens of percents. Without a y-axis and without even a definition of what a crash rate actually is, it is very hard to take this graph seriously at all. With that aside, further returning to the PlayStation Store, they mention how there is a process and they are in the middle of that process. I don't think this necessarily means that they are at the halfway point, but rather they are in the midst of it. It is not like they are in the final steps. And even if it does return, it seems like it might not be full open or just a regular uploaded game. They mention how there's even been conversations about having a warning pop up before you buy Cyberpunk, mentioning that it does have some issues similar to what's on Xbox. And to put that into context, we are now about to hit 6 months since the release of Cyberpunk, and it still isn't available on PlayStation yet again. Half a year has almost gone by here. On the topic, they do mention how there is another big update coming to the game in a few weeks, or at least I think it's a big update because it's been a while since the last one. There's actually been some leaks by a user on Reddit known as Prickly Assassin, where it does seem like June 10th could be the date that this update will get posted. That's one of the internal dates being used on the Epic Game Store for when this could be expected. June 10th being the 6-month anniversary of the game, it being a couple of weeks in the future, which they just said during this earnings call, and it being on the Epic Game Store makes it seem pretty likely. And later on during the call, they actually talk about how, while many of the first patches for this game focused on the critical issues of stability and performance, with later patches they hope to evolve into more things and mention things like perceived quality. So it almost does feel like that some of these later patches, and perhaps even this next one, could focus more on things like quality of life features, or maybe actually improving the cops in a more substantial way. Hey, that'd be cool. Although, to put this into context, if you aren't playing Cyberpunk 2077 actively or even just following the mod scene, the game is definitely not fully fixed. There are still just features that don't work, like certain perks you can get in the game that literally do nothing. Fortunately, some modders have stepped up and fixed this for us, but this applies to perks, cybernetics, and many other things. Even outside of just the traditional glitchiness, there are some fundamental things that need fixing here. But I actually think what's going to happen here, and it's almost alluded to or hinted at during this call, is at E3 we see some kind of Cyberpunk trailer and perhaps just a general marketing campaign kind of being like, hey, the game's actually better and somewhat good now. In the past, they have said that they'll have a bit of a larger marketing campaign for the next gen version. I wouldn't be surprised if we see some visuals of that version that's supposedly coming out, and they reaffirmed during this earnings call it is still coming out in the second half of 2021. We get this kind of sad excuse for an updated roadmap, and on it we also do have all of those free DLCs. We technically know nothing about any of this, and with the update dropping just before E3 and Cyberpunk being at the past couple of E3s, I would expect us to hear something during that Xbox showcase. And we know at the very least there have been some changes in management, as it's been recently reported that the game director on Cyberpunk for CDPR has changed. Adam Badowski, who I'm almost certainly butchering the name of, will now oversee things on a much higher level. He was previously the game director on Cyberpunk, and now Gabriel Amatigello, who I'm also probably butchering the name of, will be the director of Cyberpunk. Gabriel in the past with Dragon Age Inquisition has headed some really good DLCs. A lot of Dragon Age Inquisition's DLCs were highly regarded, definitely better than the base game for a lot of people. And to me, this is pretty exciting. Clearly, whatever they did before was bad and it wasn't working. So bringing in somebody who has had success in the past to spin up some of these large-scale expansions and free DLCs does get me a bit more excited for the future. It was mentioned during this call that 1/3 of the old Cyberpunk content team is now working on unannounced things. Although we do know that proper parallel development of AAA titles isn't starting until next year. Right now, it seems like a lot of that is on pre-production or perhaps on some Cyberpunk DLC. As far as the Cyberpunk team, more directly, half of it is working on Cyberpunk itself and next gen, while the other half is divided into smaller teams working on future stuff. So looking at this overall, what I think we find is CDPR right now is in a bad state. Q2 is likely not going to be much better. Q2 ends on June 31st, so already several months into it, but I could see an uptick towards the end of Q2 and even starting off Q3. We could start to see a bit of a turnaround here with whatever is shown at E3, whatever this June 10th patch potentially does contain, and of course with the new direction under the game director. Either way, that's where things stand now for CD Projekt and Cyberpunk. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this one. Hopefully it's helping keep you up to date with a game that you may no longer playing, or maybe that you're interested in buying at some point. I thank you all again for watching, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.